Welcome to the History in Focus channel. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this one.
The official history of the civilized world has many gaps. There are laws in effect today, in countries recognized by the United Nations, that authorize practices most people would classify as pure barbarism. Some originate from religious texts 1,000 years old. Others were drafted by elected parliaments in the 21st century with counted votes. 18 real practices and laws spread across 4 continents. Many of them are happening right now while you watch this video. Number 1. Child marriage. In 1979, when the Ayatollahs took over Iran, one of the first decrees reduced the minimum age for marriage of girls to 9 years old. The justification came from a hadith, an account attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, according to which he consummated the marriage with his wife Aisha when she was exactly that age. What was a religious text from the 7th century became a numbered article in the civil code of a modern Islamic republic. The hadith in question is in the Sahih al-Bukhari, the collection of accounts of the Prophet considered most reliable by Sunni Islam, compiled in the 9th century. The record is direct. Aisha herself narrates that she was betrothed at 6 years old, and that the marriage was consummated at 9. Islamic reformists contest the account. They argue that the Arabic word may have another meaning, and that other texts suggest she was a teenager. The law, however, took the literal version, and it remains in effect. The custom did not stay in the Middle East. When families from these regions migrate to Europe, the practice migrates with them. In the United Kingdom, the government's forced marriage unit registers hundreds of cases per year. Girls taken during school vacations to the country of origin to be married without the school knowing. In Germany and France, courts prosecute parents for forced marriage of daughters between 12 and 16 years old. European law prohibits it. The custom survives inside closed communities that never needed to change. The physical impact is recorded by obstetricians across the Middle East and Africa. Girls of 10, 11, 12 years old who become pregnant before the body is biologically ready. Obstetric fistula, an injury caused by childbirth in immature bodies, is one of the leading causes of permanent disability in these regions. Regardless of whether it is an incorrect interpretation of the sacred texts of Islam or not, it is a fact that the practice is absolutely abominable and must never be tolerated. Number 2, the Chinese social credit. China has built the largest surveillance system in history, more than 700 million cameras with integrated facial recognition. They cover streets, malls, schools, and public transportation. Each camera feeds centralized databases that track in real time where each citizen is, who they are with, and what they are doing. The entire country is, in practice, a continuous monitoring system of human behavior. This system feeds the so-called social credit, a score assigned to each citizen based on everyday behavior. Those who pay bills on time, obey the laws, and do not criticize the government have a high score. Those who do not pay debts, commit traffic violations, or post content considered subversive on social media lose points. The score determines whether you can buy an airplane ticket, enroll children in school, obtain loans, or travel between cities within the country. Those with a low score have their face displayed on public screens, identified as a dishonorable person in front of everyone. The system was tested in smaller cities and expanded progressively. Companies also receive scores, and a low rating can mean loss of contracts and licenses. For the Uyghur minorities in the west of the country, the monitoring is even more intense. Cameras in mosques, mandatory DNA collection, and movement restrictions 24 hours a day. The Chinese government describes social credit as a tool for trust and public order. In reality, it is the largest social control system ever built by any government in the history of humanity. No state has ever had the technological capacity to monitor every movement of every citizen in real time. What would you think if the government knew precisely where you were yesterday at 2:37 in the afternoon, with whom, and for how long? Leave your opinion in the comments. Number 3. Iran forces homosexuals to change sex. In Iran, homosexuality is punishable by execution. At the same time, the government funds sex reassignment surgeries with public money. For the Shia clerics who govern the country, the two policies do not contradict each other. A transgender person would be a mind trapped in the wrong body, subject to medical correction. A gay or lesbian person, on the other hand, makes a sinful choice, punishable by law. The distinction is not scientific or medical, it is theological. In practice, this distinction creates a cruel trap. People who identify as gay are frequently pressured by psychologists, judges, and family members to undergo reassignment surgery as a way to escape legal persecution. The logic of the state is the following. If you are attracted to men and you are a man, the problem is your body. So correct the body. Refusing the surgery means remaining subject to penalties that include flogging and death. The result is that Iran is the second country in the world that performs the most sex reassignment surgeries, behind only Thailand. But the comparison is misleading. In Thailand, the surgery is a choice. In Iran, for a significant portion of those who undergo it, it is the only legal alternative to execution. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch document cases of gay men who transitioned not because they identified as women, but because they did not want to die. Ayatollah Khomeini was the one who established this policy in the 1980s, after being consulted by a transgender woman who asked for religious permission for the surgery. He granted it, citing classic Islamic texts. The decision was praised as progressive by some and denounced as structural coercion by activists who live inside Iran. Two healthcare systems, the same surgery, with completely opposite meanings depending on which side of the border you are on. Number 4. Killing your own daughter to restore honor. The concept of honor killing starts from a specific premise. The honor of the family is a collective asset, and a woman can destroy it. Dating without permission, refusing an arranged marriage, being raped, getting divorced, any of these acts can be interpreted as dishonor. The response, in families that operate within this system, is to eliminate the source of the shame: the daughter, the sister, the wife herself. The United Nations estimates more than 5,000 honor killings per year. Documented cases occur in Pakistan, Jordan, Turkey, Iraq, Afghanistan, and in Islamic communities in Western Europe. In Pakistan, the practice has a name: karo kari. A woman accused of immoral conduct can be killed by the father, the brother, or the husband. In some cases, the execution is public, with other family members present. The killer frequently receives reduced sentences or is acquitted. The legal perversion of the system is twofold. Whoever reports the crime can be accused of shaming the family again, which results in more violence. Women who survive murder attempts and flee to shelters report pressure from their own relatives, including mothers, to return with assurances that nothing will happen. In countries like Jordan, the state historically applied lighter sentences for killers who invoked honor as a motive. What makes this crime different from other femicides is the communal dimension. It is not one man who decides to kill. It is a family that deliberates, brothers who vote, fathers who determine. In documented cases in Pakistan, tribal councils called jirgis ordered the death of women as collective punishment for offenses committed by men from another family. The woman killed had no connection whatsoever to the original offense. She was the currency in a deal between men. Legal reforms have occurred in some countries. Jordan toughened penalties in 2017. Pakistan passed the Criminal Law Amendment Act in 2016, eliminating the possibility of the killer being forgiven by the victim's own family. But laws change faster than cultural systems. United Nations women's surveys show that the crimes have simply become less visible, disguised as suicide, accident, or unknown cause in regions where the state has little physical presence. Number 5. In Saudi Arabia, every woman was legally considered a minor, regardless of how old she was. She needed authorization from a male guardian, the mahram, to marry, divorce, travel, work in certain sectors, leave prison, or sign contracts. It was not cultural custom. It was written in the Saudi civil code enforced by the religious police. The guardian could be the father. In the absence of the father, the husband. In the absence of the husband, the son. An adult woman could need authorization from her own son to make decisions about her own life. The religious police, the mutawa, patrolled public spaces to ensure women were accompanied. They approached, interrogated, and detained anyone who was unaccompanied in situations considered improper. This was not medieval Saudi Arabia. This was 2010. In March of 2002, a fire destroyed a girls' school in Mecca. 15 girls died. Survivors reported that the religious police prevented some from fleeing because they were not wearing the hijab and blocked the entry of rescue workers. The Saudi government never officially confirmed the account. The Arab newspaper Al Watan published a detailed investigation that documented the pattern. Those responsible were not punished. The law that created the situation remained valid for another 17 years. The Saudi legal code also establishes that the testimony of a woman is worth half that of a man in legal proceedings. A woman inherits half of what a man of the same kinship inherits. In Qatar, the applied Islamic law allows the husband to reduce the wife's support if she refuses sexual relations. The refusal is legally recognized as a contractual breach. Reforms starting in 2019 in Saudi Arabia allowed women over 21 years old to travel without male authorization and obtain a driver's license. These were real changes. But the guardianship system was not abolished. It was reduced. This happened because the Saudi government needed a different narrative to attract investments. Are reforms motivated by economic pressure worth the same as reforms motivated by rights? Write your answer in the comments. Number 6. Eritrea. Military service with no end date. Eritrea has the longest mandatory military service in the world, indefinite by law. At 18 years old, every citizen is conscripted. There is no legal deadline for termination. In practice, men and women have spent entire decades in service, receiving about $30 per month. When they receive anything, the state can keep them for as long as it wants, doing whatever it determines, with no deadline and no legal recourse available. The service is not only military. The Eritrean government uses conscripts as labor in state construction, agriculture, and public enterprises. The United Nations Special Rapporteur for Eritrea documented that the working conditions, deprivation of liberty, and absence of adequate compensation constitute slavery by international legal definition. The Eritrean government rejected all conclusions as foreign interference and never cooperated with the investigations. This explains one of the largest migratory flows in Africa. Eritreans are one of the largest refugee populations in the world in proportion to the size of the country. Estimates point to between 3 and 4 million people out of a total population of perhaps 6 million. They cross the Sahara Desert, pass through Libya, and attempt the Mediterranean in precarious vessels. Many die. Those who reach Europe frequently receive refugee status because the persecution at home is documented. President Isaias Afwerki has governed Eritrea since 1991, when the country became independent. There has never been an election. The constitution approved in 1997 was never implemented. The only party is the ruling one. In 2001, when independent journalists were imprisoned without trial, some remained detained years later. The indefinite military service is not the only piece of the system. It is the piece that keeps the others in place, because nobody who is serving can organize resistance. Number 7. Being gay is a death sentence in 6 countries. In 6 countries, the law establishes the death penalty for consensual sexual relations between adults of the same sex: Saudi Arabia, Brunei, Yemen, Iran, Mauritania, and Nigeria. It is not an interpretation of a vague norm. It is text expressed in the penal code with the sentence specified: hanging, decapitation, or stoning depending on the jurisdiction. Criminalization exists in more than 60 countries, in 11 of them with capital punishment. In Iran, the Islamic Revolution of 1979 transformed what was tolerated under the Shah's regime into a crime punishable by death. Since then, Amnesty International estimates between 4,000 and 6,000 people executed in the country for homosexuality, and the government does not contest the method, only the framing. The executions are recorded. There are photos, videos, and reports. The Iranian government does not deny it. It classifies the deaths as punishment for sodomy, which in Iranian Islamic jurisprudence carries the death penalty expressly in law. In 2023, Brunei fully implemented its penal code based on Sharia, including stoning for homosexuality. Brunei is a wealthy sultanate, a member of the United Nations, a commercial partner of Western countries, and has an airline that operates in European airports. The implementation generated protests and calls for boycott. The Sultan responded that the law reflects sovereign Islamic values. Tourism dropped temporarily. The law did not change. The commercial partners remained partners. Nigeria criminalizes homosexuality with 14 years in prison in the Christian South and the death penalty in the Muslim North under Sharia in states like Kano and Zamfara. In 2014, the Same-Sex Marriage Prohibition Act was passed with 90% of the votes in Parliament. There was applause in the session. Nigeria receives billions in foreign aid from Western countries that publicly criticize the law and maintain the funding regardless. Do you think foreign aid should be conditioned on human rights? Number 8. Burning the widow on the husband's pyre. Sati is a Hindu practice in which the widow throws herself, or is thrown, onto the funeral pyre of her dead husband. The word Sati means virtuous woman in Sanskrit. The ideological root is the idea that a woman without a husband is spiritually incomplete and socially useless. The death on the pyre was presented as voluntary. Historical and colonial records indicate that in many cases it was not, and that there was physical coercion. The British banned Sati in 1829, after decades of pressure from Hindu reformers and colonial administrators. Commander Charles Napier became famous for a response he gave to local leaders, who protested against the ban. When they said that burning widows was an ancestral custom that should be respected, he responded that the British also had a custom. When men burn women alive, they put a rope around their necks and hang them. The practice was banned. In 1987, Roop Kanwar, 18 years old, died burned on her husband's pyre in Deorala, Rajasthan. The case made national headlines. There was intense debate over whether it was voluntary or forced. The husband's family insisted it was. Neighbors said she tried to run. Nobody was convicted. The Indian government passed an anti-Sati law that same year, criminalizing both the practice and the public glorification of the act. Isolated cases continue to be reported in villages in the interior. Sati was the solution the system created for a problem it itself generated. A society that built the value of a woman entirely around the husband ended up without an answer for what to do with her when the husband dies. The pyre was the exit that logic produced. And what continues to exist is not the fire, it is that logic. Indian widows in certain communities are still treated as bad luck, excluded from parties and ceremonies, invisible to the society around them. Number 9. In North Korea, your destiny was decided by your great-grandfather. Yes, in North Korea, the fate of each citizen is determined before their birth. The system is called Songbun, and it classifies each family based on the political history of the ancestors during and after the founding of the regime in 1948. Families of workers loyal to the party have high Songbun. Families of former landowners, Christians, or relatives in the South have low Songbun. And that number defines everything. Songbun determines where you can live, study, work, and whom you can marry. People with low Songbun are prohibited from living in Pyongyang. They do not enter the best universities. They are not accepted in strategic positions in the armed forces. They receive smaller rations during supply crises. The 3 main categories are loyal, wavering, and hostile, and whoever falls into hostile can be sent to labor camps for an indefinite time, without trial and without recourse. The North Korean labor camps, the Kwanliso, are documented by satellite, by testimonies of defectors, and by United Nations reports. The United Nations Commission of Inquiry of 2014 concluded that the crimes committed in these camps are equivalent to crimes against humanity, with a degree of cruelty without parallel in the contemporary world. Population estimates in the camps range between 80,000 and 120,000 people, including children who were born inside and have never been outside the walls. Songbun is periodically revised by the state, which means that a denunciation, an infraction, or a relative who fled to China can downgrade an entire family. 5-year-old children whose father defected are reclassified. The system does not punish only the individual. It punishes the lineage. A grandfather who collaborated with the Japanese during the occupation has grandchildren who pay the price 70 years later in labor camps. That is the design of the system. Shin Dong-hyuk was born in a Kwanliso camp in 1982 and lived there until he was 23 years old. In 2012, he published his memoirs in the book Escape from Camp 14. He reported never having left the camp before his escape, never having eaten enough, and having reported his mother and brother to the state, which resulted in the execution of both. Asked if he felt guilt, he replied that he was raised not to understand what guilt means. That was the system that shaped him. The book is available worldwide. Number 10. 200 million women without the right to their own body. Female genital mutilation is the partial or total removal of the external genitalia without medical purpose. It occurs in at least 30 countries, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East. The World Health Organization estimates that more than 200 million women alive today have already undergone the procedure. In Somalia, 97% of women have been subjected to some form. In Gambia, 75% of girls between 15 and 19 years old. The procedure is performed without anesthesia, usually with razor blades, knives, or pieces of glass, on girls of 5, 6, 7 years old. The justification varies by region: to guarantee virginity, to control female sexual desire, to ensure fidelity to the future husband, or to fulfill a rite of passage. It has no clear basis in the Quran. Islamic theologians have debated this for decades. But the practice persists, even in communities that are not religious, because it became an autonomous cultural norm. The medical consequences are severe and permanent: chronic pain, recurrent infections, scars that complicate childbirth, obstetric fistulas, and documented psychological problems. The most severe type of mutilation, infibulation, which sews nearly the entire vaginal opening shut, requires surgical cutting to allow sexual intercourse and new cuts with each childbirth. It is a cycle of physical interventions that begins in childhood and lasts a lifetime, without the woman having asked for any of them. Mutilation has been criminalized in many of the countries where it occurs. The problem is that the procedure takes place inside closed communities, with the consent of the mothers themselves, who went through the same process and reproduced the cycle. Girls who resist are pressured by the family and the community. In some cases, they flee to Western countries and seek asylum based on mutilation as persecution. British and French courts have recognized these requests as legitimate. In immigrant communities in Europe and the United States, female genital mutilation continues to be practiced clandestinely, or the girls are taken during vacations to the countries of origin for the procedure. The question that divides lawmakers and activists is exactly this: how far does the state have the right to intervene in cultural practices of private communities? What answer would you give? Write in the comments. This debate is happening right now in real parliaments. Number 11. Stoned to death for having sex. Stoning, rajam, is the penalty prescribed in classical Islamic jurisprudence for adultery, and, in some interpretations, for premarital sex. The method is specific. The person is buried up to the waist, and the community throws stones until death. The stones cannot be large enough to kill quickly, nor too small to not cause injury. The objective, according to classical Islamic texts, is for death to be slow. In 2010, a young couple in Afghanistan was stoned and killed by hundreds of villagers. The crime was sex before marriage. The Taliban approved the execution. There were children in the crowd. The sentence was carried out in an open field, filmed on cell phones. The video circulated. In 2021, when the Taliban retook power, the Minister of Justice announced that stoning would be applied again. He said this at a press conference in front of journalists from around the world. The problem that stoning for adulteries creates for women goes beyond the penalty itself. In many systems based on Sharia, a woman who claims to have been raped must present 4 male witnesses to the act to prove her version. Without the witnesses, the complaint can be inverted. She confessed to an extramarital relationship. The victim becomes the defendant, and the penalty can be stoning. It is documented in real cases in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Somalia. In 2008, a 13-year-old girl was stoned in Kismayo, Somalia, controlled by al-Shabaab. She had reported to the authorities that she was abused by 3 men. The complaint was what condemned her, for adultery. Hundreds of people watched. When soldiers tried to save her, the crowd reacted. The case reached international organizations. None of the perpetrators were punished. Al-Shabaab still controls significant parts of Somali territory. Number 12. The contract that turns a worker into property. The Kafala system is the legal model that governs migrant workers in Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Bahrain. The name means sponsorship in Arabic. In practice, the foreign worker only exists legally in the country if they have a local sponsor, usually the employer, responsible for the visa, the legal status, and in practice, the existence of that worker in that territory. The structural problem of Kafala is that it ties the worker to the employer in a way that creates total legal dependence. Changing jobs without the sponsor's permission was a crime until recent partial reforms. Leaving the country without permission as well. If the employer cancels the sponsorship for any reason, the worker is immediately in an irregular situation. Employers use this as leverage, and they frequently confiscate passports, which is illegal but widely documented. In Qatar, the numbers are extreme. 1.7 million migrant workers in a total population of approximately 2.9 million. The majority came from Nepal, India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan to build the stadiums for the 2022 World Cup. The Guardian newspaper estimated, based on official data, that more than 6,500 migrant workers died in Qatar between 2010 and 2020. The Qatari government contested the methodology. The deaths are in the consular records of the countries of origin. Qatar announced reforms to the Kafala system in 2020, under pressure from FIFA and international organizations. Some changes were implemented. Workers can now change jobs more easily under certain conditions, but activists document that the reforms are applied inconsistently and that passport confiscation and exit restrictions continue to occur. The World Cup was held, the stadiums were inaugurated, the workers who survived went home. Number 13. The insufficient dowry that kills the bride. The dowry is the amount paid by the bride's family to the groom at marriage. In India, the practice was banned in 1961. The law exists, the dowry continues. And when the groom's family considers the amount paid to be insufficient, a sequence of violence begins that frequently ends in murder. The Indian government records more than 7,000 dowry deaths per year. The real number is estimated to be significantly higher. The most common method became known as bride burning the bride. The husband's family pushes the woman against the stove, pours kerosene, and sets her on fire. Then they register it as a domestic accident. The rate of deaths by burns in young married women in India is statistically anomalous compared to any other demographic group. Most cases never reach trial because the husband's family controls the initial records of the incident. The economic logic is direct. The dowry creates an incentive for the groom's family to eliminate the wife and marry again, charging a new dowry. The faster this happens, the more times it can happen. Indian activists call this the matrimonial liquidation cycle. The dowry also functions as an instrument of control while the marriage lasts. The threat of violence is permanent, and the woman who flees loses any claim to the amount paid by her own family. Indian feminist movements have pushed for reforms since the 1970s. Section 498A of the Penal Code criminalizes cruelty by the husband and family members against the wife. Cases are prosecuted. Convictions happen. But the Indian judicial system deals with a volume of cases that results in delays of years. For a woman inside a violent marriage, years is too long. 7,000 deaths per year continue to happen in a country that has had the law written for more than 60 years. Number 14. 250 million people forbidden to exist. The Hindu caste system divides society into hierarchical groups determined by birth. At the bottom are the Dalits, called untouchables by the groups above. Estimates indicate that 250 million people, mainly in India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka, live under caste-based discrimination. The Indian Constitution prohibited this discrimination in 1950. 75 years later, the reality is different. In rural villages, Dalits are still prohibited from using the same wells, entering the same temples, or eating at the same restaurants as members of upper castes. In many places, they cannot wear sandals in the presence of a Brahmin, cannot sit in chairs when a superior is nearby, and their children sit separately in school. These are not written rules. They are customary norms maintained by violence when challenged. Whoever challenges faces collective punishment. Manual scavenging, the collection of excrement with bare hands, is a function historically assigned to Dalits and still practiced in parts of the country. The Indian government declared the practice illegal in 1993 and again in 2013. The 2011 census identified more than 180,000 workers still performing this function. Human Rights Watch estimates the real number well above that. They regularly die from poisoning, drowning in pits, and inhalation of gases without equipment. Violence against Dalits who challenge the system is documented systematically. Dalit women have disproportionate rates of rape, with cases covered up by police officers of upper caste. Dalit men who marry women of upper castes are murdered. Dalit children who overcome educational barriers report humiliation by teachers and classmates. The reservation system, quotas for lower castes, has existed since 1950 and is contested in court to this day. Bhimrao Ambedkar, the architect of the Indian Constitution of 1950, was a Dalit. He created the largest democracy in the world with a charter that prohibited the system that oppressed his own family. He died in 1956 without seeing the country implement what he wrote. His photo is in government offices, his law is on paper, and the 250 million Dalits continue to be prohibited from entering temples dedicated to gods he never stopped believing in. That silence between the law and life is the case. Number 15. Electroshock to cure homosexuality. Conversion therapy is a set of practices aimed at altering the sexual orientation or gender identity of a person. There is no scientific evidence that it works. This is the consensus of the World Health Organization, the American Psychological Association, and all major mental health entities in the world. This consensus did not prevent the practice from continuing in dozens of countries, officially or clandestinely. The methods range from conversations with pastors to procedures that border on torture. Electroshock applied to the genitals, sleep deprivation, controlled drowning, exorcisms. In Ecuador, clinics detained lesbian women in forced internment with the support of families. In China, gay men were committed to psychiatric hospitals and subjected to medication and electroshock. In Malaysia, the government funds sexual reorientation programs for men identified as gay. In Brazil, in 1999, the Federal Council of Psychology prohibited psychologists from offering treatment for homosexuality. In 2017, a federal judge temporarily suspended that prohibition, which generated a public crisis and international coverage. The suspension was reversed. But the episode revealed that the practice continued to occur clandestinely in religious clinics across the country. In 2022, the United Nations classified conversion therapy as torture and a crime against humanity. People who survived conversion therapy described the same patterns in accounts from different countries: shame, isolation, family pressure, religious and then medical intervention, severe depression, and suicide attempts. Sexual orientation did not change in any documented case. What changed was the ability to live without guilt. Do you know someone who went through this? Write in the comments. Most people do not know what happens inside these clinics. Number 16. The ritual that transmits HIV and is mandatory. In regions of Malawi, Zambia, Uganda, and Kenya, when a man dies, the widow must undergo a purification ritual. In English, it is called widow cleansing. The logic is that the spirit of the dead husband is trapped in her body, and that without a specific sexual act with a healer or relative of the deceased, that spirit will haunt and destroy the family. The ritual is not optional. Refusal has concrete consequences. Women who refuse the ritual are expelled from the home of the husband's family, lose the right to any inheritance, and are socially isolated. In contexts where the land belongs to the husband's family and there is no individual female property, expulsion literally means being without a roof and without income. The coercion is economic, social, and sometimes physical. United Nations Women and UNFPA document cases in which women were forced into the ritual against their will with the approval of family members present. The relationship between widow cleansing and the HIV epidemic in sub-Saharan Africa is direct and documented by epidemiologists. The healer, called Fisi, hyena in the Chiwa language, frequently attends multiple widows without a condom. By definition, the ritual requires contact without a barrier as part of the purification. In regions where HIV prevalence among adults exceeds 10%, this practice is one of the identified vectors of transmission. Eric Aniva publicly presented himself as a professional Fisai in Malawi and was arrested in 2016 after his story reached the BBC. He claimed to have purified more than 100 widows. He was HIV positive. The governments of Malawi and Zambia criminalized the ritual. Community leaders in some regions declared opposition. But the practice persists in rural areas where the state has little presence and the authority of the healer surpasses that of the written law. The arrest of Aniva did not change what happens in the villages. Number 17. Changing religion can cost your life. Apostasy, the formal renunciation of a faith, is punishable by death in at least 12 countries: Afghanistan, Iran, Qatar, Mauritania, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Yemen, among others. The legal basis is classical Islamic jurisprudence, which establishes Rida as a capital crime. It is not an arbitrary application of a vague norm. It is the dominant interpretation of Sharia in legal systems that adopted it as an official civil code. The process in Iran works as follows. The person who abandons Islam can be reported by any citizen. An Islamic court evaluates the case. If the apostasy is confirmed, the defendant has the opportunity to recant. If they recant, they may be acquitted, but will remain under permanent suspicion. If they do not recant, the sentence is death for men and life imprisonment for women, depending on the interpretation of the court. Countries where apostasy is not a capital crime can also be dangerous for those who leave Islam. In Egypt, Morocco, and Jordan, former Muslims lose concrete civil rights. Marriages to Muslims can be annulled by the state, custody of children can be judicially revoked, inheritance can be denied. The state does not execute, but creates legal conditions that make life sufficiently difficult to function as punishment. Social isolation and family pressure complete the rest. Inside Islamic communities in Western Europe, murders for apostasy occur as family honor crimes. Leaving Islam is treated as dishonor equivalent to promiscuity. Documented cases in the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Germany involve young people who converted to Christianity or declared atheism and were killed by relatives. In these countries, the state prosecutes the killers as common criminals. The religious motivation rarely results in an aggravated sentence. Number 18. Buying a wife with cattle. Bride price is the amount paid by the groom to the bride's family before the wedding. It is distinct from the Indian dowry. Here, the movement is the reverse. The practice has different names by region: Lobola in Zimbabwe and South Africa, Rura in northern Zimbabwe. It occurs widely in sub-Saharan Africa and in parts of Asia, including Papua New Guinea and rural regions of China. The original logic was to compensate the family for the loss of a daughter. Over time, in many contexts, the payment came to be interpreted differently. The groom bought the woman. This semantic shift is not abstract. It has documented physical consequences. Surveys by ActionAid in Zimbabwe and Uganda record a direct correlation between the amount paid in bride price and the incidence of domestic violence. The higher the payment, the more the man tends to act as if he had bought property, and as if property could not refuse orders. In Papua New Guinea, where domestic violence rates are already among the highest in the world, the bride price system is cited in research as an aggravating factor. Husbands who paid high amounts resist separation, arguing they would be returning the merchandise at a loss. The bride's families, who receive the payment, pressure their daughters not to separate, so they do not have to return the amount. The system creates an economic layer that makes leaving abusive relationships difficult from all sides. In rural China, a variation called Kylie has raised prices to levels that put families in debt for years. The scarcity of women created by the one-child policy increased the market value of a wife. Cases of kidnapping women from poorer regions for sale to families that cannot afford the Kylie have been documented for years. A system that began as family compensation produced human trafficking with market logic. 18 practices, 18 systems of law or custom that exist right now in the same world where you're watching this video. None of them appeared out of nowhere. All of them have history, context, and internal logic. Understanding that logic is not agreeing with it. It is the only path to confronting it. If any case stayed in your head, write in the comments which one it was and why.